Hello everyone and welcome back to the 21st episode of the Road to the Master series, in which I will cover the round number 6 of Irena Warakomska Memorial, in which I got paired with Hubert Mers from Poland with black pieces. I felt like it's the worst pairing possible out of the other possibilities I had, because as you may know from the previous video, the day before that game I injured my feet, and for that reason I was not willing to play along games, if you may say that. And the idea is that I was planning on offering a draw to any opponent I will get that day. However, Hubert was the higher rated and the youngest of all players that I could be paired with. Therefore, I was unlucky, let's say, and I felt like, okay, it's going to be a long game because he is going to prove me that he is a better player. However, before the game, I saw that there is a girl that he is talking to, meaning maybe that he has a date or something later that day, so I felt I had a chance and I decided to still proceed with the draw offer at the very early stages of the game. So let's see how it went. He decided to go with knight f3, which was no surprise to me. I decided to basically copy his ideas, copy his moves until this point, and after e3 I played c5 to meet together on the d4 square and exchange pawns, and at this point I offered a draw. And I saw in his eyes that he is kind of fighting with himself, should he accept it or not, but in the end he decided that, chess is more important than a date, and he decided to just continue the game. He gave me a check on b5, after which I covered the check with knight b to d7. The check itself does not do much to me. I'm not even also worried about knight e5 jumps, but on the other hand, this knight has nowhere to go in the future, so that's something to have in mind. We both continued our development. He castled, I play e6, a4. I'm not sure about this move, but okay. I continued development simply with bishop e7 and then castle, and he decided to now jump to c6. I felt like it might be tempting for him, but I felt like at the same time it's an inaccuracy. Why? After knight e5 you always have to consider moves like this, but at this point I felt like this bishop is a very bad one, so I would be happy to really exchange it, and this will be just a lost tempo, I would say, from his perspective. So I decided to still proceed with castling. After knight c6 I played rook c8, trying to develop my rook with a tempo, and also even though bishop b5 now seems like a better choice, the more obvious one, let's say, is bishop b7. But after bishop b7 I can hit the bishop here, hit the bishop here, and place my knight in much better spot than it was before. So all that white did in the last 5 to 6 moves was exchanging the knight from f3 for the bishop on b7. I'm not sure if that's the good idea for him, and the bishop went from b5 to d3, but with much longer route, while I, on the other hand, was able to place my knight in a better spot, place my rook in the better spot. So I felt like at this point I played this period of the game a little bit better. So I hope, okay, maybe he will revise his plans for the evening, for the afternoon, and he will offer me a draw this time, but that did not happen, as you may imagine. He continued with c3. Normal move, trying to not only protect the pawn but also protect the b4 square, to which I would love to jump with the knight to hit this bishop. And at this point, even though, as I've said, I felt like I've played those few past moves better, I didn't have a clear idea how to continue. This was the problem. Until this point I used only like 5 minutes of the time to think about the game in general, and at this moment I spent much more. Why? Because I have so many moves that are so little different from each other that I couldn't really choose. What are the moves? Well, perhaps bishop d6, placing the bishop a little bit better. Maybe rook e8, simply developing move. Maybe I can jump to e4, trying to force things a little bit. Or if I'm talking about forcing stuff, maybe e5. Or maybe some other calm move. So 4 or 5 moves to consider, all of them more or less similar to each other. And well, what to play, how to define, how to differentiate them, this was the task. Obviously, when you start to calculate the variation, you have to start with the most forcing ones, so I decided to go with the e5. e5 in general is a nice option to try to find some more space for my pieces, but on the other hand I felt like at this position this bishop pair, even though as of now it's not the most active, maybe in the future it will be, and I couldn't find really a follow-up for myself, while in reality white has a very clear follow-up, because white will play knight d2, knight f3 and either exchange the knights or jump further to d4, trying to block my isolated pawn with the knight, and then slowly but steadily going further with the development. And I for myself couldn't find a clear way how to proceed. Should I don't know, go for some initiative on the king side, or should I just finish development? If so, how to do it? I didn't know that, so I decided against playing quick e5. And if that's the case, well, what else can I play? I considered mostly bishop d6 because it puts the bishop to the better square and also perhaps helps a little bit with e5, not only with the pawn being more protected because pawn was already enough protected, but the idea is that bishop is hitting the h2 square and the queen has a, let's say, better option to maybe go through to h4 to also attack the h2 pawn. How would it happen? Perhaps if my opponent opted for knight d2 here, I can now play e5, and the difference is that as of now the bishop is attacked because this connection is interrupted, therefore bishop c2 would be played. And now with the move like knight f to g4 and queen h4, I am trying to, let's say, checkmate the opponent, right? What's the problem? The problem is that he can actually accept my sacrifice and play knight f3 because knight very nicely covers the h2 square. And even though I have possibility like bishop h2 and then queen h5, trying to create some checkmate patterns, or at least perpetual checks patterns on this side of the board, the problem is the move g3. It does not look that obvious at the very beginning because, well, what's the point in giving up the pawn, because I can simply take it while at the same time attacking the king. But after king g2, the problem is that my attack stops and I just sacrificed a piece, right? And not only that, I am the one who might be attacked right now. And even though I still have a bishop takes f2 option, very nice one, trying to not only get more and more material, but also I am threatening with the fork to the king and the queen. After rook h1, knight e3, king f2, knight d1 check is very important. If he takes back my knight, I feel like I should be okay, right? I have a queen, okay, for many light pieces, but at the same time I still have few pawns to add to the queen. So what's wrong about this? Well, my queen is not able to really escape from the king side, right? How? Those squares are taken by the knight and by the bishop. Those squares obviously are taken by the rook, so the only one possible to go for me as of now is g4, and well, the h7 weakness is there, so he can just simply take the pawn, play bishop f5, get the queen back, and have like 3 light pieces advantage. So I would say that it's enough to win the game. And I was calculating it from the very beginning until this very point, more than 10 moves, spent so much time on it, and it did not work. So that's unfortunate because I felt like, okay, this would be the way to go. And even though bishop d6 itself as a strategic move, let's say, is a very nice one, simply making my piece look better, I decided against playing that move. And well, what do I have left, right? Knight e4 I did not like at all because opponent can simply try to take the pawn and attack it, maybe like that. I didn't really like this outcome, even though computer says I have the advantage. I am not sure why and how to achieve that. So yeah, I was completely unhappy with this variation, and for that reason I don't have much left. I discarded e5, bishop d6, knight e4, rook e8 seemed too slow too, so what can I play? I decided to go with queen c8. How will I explain it to you guys? I don't know. Basically, one of the ideas that I also had in mind, connected to the move e5, is that sometimes I would love to play a move like d4. Because sometimes if I have enough pressure on c5 and my opponent does not have enough pressure on the d4 square, maybe that's how I will be able to push e5, and queen c8 helps with that, because if my opponent goes with knight d2, I can now play e5, and after takes bishop c2, I in the end can play d4. This was my idea, and the idea is that he cannot really take it because of the many exchanges, and I should not be worse at all at the end of the variation. And after c4, I felt like, okay, finally I got something going on my own, for my own, and I should be okay, because okay, it's an isolated weak pawn, but also it's a passer, and I felt like it's more of an advantage than a weakness, so I was happy with that outcome. However, what's the problem? Well, opponent does not have to play knight d2, and the other reason why I played queen c8 is the fact that I felt like I might bait my opponent into playing queen e2. And funny enough, I now spotted the idea of playing knight a5, hitting the pawn. And I knew that perhaps he would defend it with knight d2. And I spotted the idea of simply sacrificing an exchange. Why is it okay idea? Because I am getting at least a pawn for an exchange, so it's not that bad in terms of material. And also, if he accepted, I am hitting many weaknesses in his camp, let's say. So I was kind of happy with the outcome from the distance. But the problem is this, guys. When we were at this point, I told you that I've calculated bishop d6, and I did that by calculating more than 10 moves ahead and so on, so on. But then when I decided to play queen c8, I calculated it for like 15 seconds maybe, because I thought, okay, maybe I will be able to sacrifice an exchange, so let's go for it, right? And the problem was that it's not really the way of thinking in chess that will guarantee you winning games, but I was so exhausted by calculating this bishop d6 line, and I lost already so much time on the clock that I decided, okay, I cannot lose anymore, so I played queen c8 with the idea of knight a5, and now sacrificing the rook. However, at this point, obviously, I had to calculate it a little bit deeper, and I was not happy with few of the variations. What are those? After rook takes c3, the problem is that my opponent can try playing an in-between move bishop a6, simply getting one more tempo on my queen, because my queen has to protect the rook, and bishop will be amazingly placed on c8, not allowing me later on to activate my rook. We'll get to that. And for that reason, I felt like at this point, not only am I not so active as I wished to be, but also after queen e3, he is kind of holding to all weaknesses. And for this reason, I was unsure how to continue, because I felt like, okay, maybe bishop b4 might be a move, and then I'm hitting here and here still and here, so basically I'm using the dark squares around the opponent. But after knight f3, the problem is that I cannot really exchange the queens and take here because of rook b1 hitting both my pieces. Also, I cannot really play in that way, because then the rook goes from the other side, attacking both my light pieces similarly. So due to those reasons, I was unable to really find anything specific for myself. And not only that, at this point I was unhappy with the move rook a to d1. Rook f to d1 would be a mistake, because I can now trade the queens, trade on d2, and deliver a fork. This would be the point. But if rook from a1 goes to the d1 square, there will be no fork at the end of this variation. And even though I might still be able to grab this additional pawn, making the material equal, after rook c2 and this rook penetration, I felt like my knights will be just too slow to really fight with the rooks and the bishop of the opponent, and I would be losing. So for those reasons, I decided against sacrificing on c3, as you can tell, once again wasting so much time. But at this point, after bishop d6, which I finally chose, my opponent opted for f4 very quickly, and I felt, okay, so now that's a chance for me to sacrifice on c3, because in the very similar variation, right, if I sacrifice, even if he plays bishop a6 and so on, he does not have queen e3, right? Because the pawn is not protecting the queen. Therefore, his only move to protect everything, all those weaknesses, is queen d3. But I felt like after queen d3, I might have more opportunities to attack him, also due to the fact that d4 will be the weakness forever. So the best thing I can do here is basically trade the queens, play knight c6, switching the target from b3 pawn to the d4 pawn, because the idea is that he cannot really protect it, because if he plays knight f4, now the f4 pawn will be lost. So plenty of weaknesses on the opponent's behalf. Therefore, I felt like, okay, after f4, now that's the time to sacrifice. Also, the other factor that I included in my thinking, why I even started thinking about sacrificing, was that if my opponent is not willing to take a draw, I'm not really happy with the idea of defending this closed position for like 70 moves. So I just sacrificed on c3, guys. What's the idea? If he plays bishop a6, I told you what's going on, but he took on c3. I was kind of surprised, because, well, why wouldn't you want to place your bishop on a6 with a tempo, right? Something was odd, but I still did not feel insecure, let's say, and I still continued with my ideal plan, which was to play rook c8. Now, obviously, you have to be aware of the fact that queen e3, okay, it does not suggest a queen trade, but it has a little trick to it. What's the trick? If I now take the pawn, let's say, after bishop h7, I basically can resign the game because it's a discovered attack and I'm losing my queen. So for that reason I had to protect my queen somehow, and I decided to play rook c8. Perhaps bishop b4 was a little bit more precise, but I did not see the move coming that was played, because my opponent was playing f4 so quickly, bishop takes c3 so quickly, and so on, because at this point he found knight c4 move. And when I saw that, and when you saw this also on the thumbnail, you might say, what's going on? And I ask myself, what's going on? It's a very, very powerful move due to the fact that it's disrupting the connection between my rook and the queen, therefore once again allowing this trick. Not only that, knight is hitting the bishop and the knight, and my bishop is not protected. My knight was a very active piece because it was attacking the weakness. So what am I even going to play? And I felt like I might be even losing because, well, I cannot take the knight because I'm losing the queen. I cannot really take on b3 now because he will take my knight and then once again deliver the same trick. Also I was calculating, okay, let's take a pawn, allow him to take here, maybe play queen b4 and place his knight there, but I felt, okay, even though this knight is stuck, I'm still a rook down, so it cannot be really working. So what am I even going to do? My strongest candidate move for a while was rook takes c4, simply giving up the exchange one more, because I felt like at this point I might be able to finally protect my queen and then play on, let's say, opponent's weaknesses, but I was unable to do it due to one tempo. Why? If he attacked my queen, I was planning on playing queen d2, and after exchanges I was happy with taking on d4, and it is kind of a forced line, as you can tell. So I was okay, maybe I can fight here, but obviously I cannot. And also at the end there is c takes d5, making use of my weakness of the king, so I will be losing more pawns, complete disaster. Therefore I was kind of lucky to see the move bishop b4. Bishop b4 will be a good move thanks to the knight g4 idea later on, and knight g4 idea was the one that I was counting on anyway. Let's say at this point it's my move, I wanted to play knight g4, hitting the queen, and the queen has to protect everything, so after being hit the queen has to move, giving up at least a pawn or a piece and so on, activating my knight, making my queen better, taking on d4 with a check, and so on. So this was my idea from the very beginning. For that reason, if he, let's say, played h3 instead of this amazing knight c4, I would be happy to play g6, get rid of those problems, and once again maintaining the activity. I was never worried about such move because I will be happy to exchange the queen for two rooks and get the momentum going. But going back to the game, guys, after knight c4, bishop b4, the only move, he can now take my knight, and once again the only move will be knight g4. So I was a little bit lucky, but not just purely lucky, okay? What's the idea of knight g4? Once again I'm hitting the queen with the idea of then being able to hit the d4 pawn, and I'm giving myself time to get back this knight because I have this time. My opponent had two options, I believe, either queen e2, more of a calm variation but a solid one, or queen a3, trying to not only hit my knight but also the pawn and create some initiative. At this point I would play in f5, simply protecting the knight, closing the diagonal, and then later on getting back the knight, and if knight jumps anywhere I can simply now take a pawn, and at this point perhaps I can sacrifice my queen, with the fact that at the end I will deliver this amazing fork, obviously taking a queen later on, and this position, even though I'm still a knight down, would be a nice one for me because the knight is never going away and I have a lot of pawns. But as I've said, at this point my opponent had a choice and he opted for queen e2. It does not change the variation too much, I will still take the pawn on d4, but at this point, guys, I cannot really take on a5 yet. Why? Because this queen from e2 is attacking my knight on g4, so I cannot really take the knight either this or that way, because simply my opponent can perhaps try to take the pawn and then the knight, maintaining the material advantage, making my king weak. I was unhappy with the situation, and not only that, opponent has a stronger reply that I did not see during the game, which is bishop a6, trying to go away from the pressure from my queen, attack the rook, still attacking the knight, and after rook c6, bishop b5, I will be losing more material simply losing the game. And for those reasons, once again I play the only move to survive, which is knight e3. Once again, abandoning the idea of taking the knight because I want to activate all my pieces that I have left, at the same time hitting the rook too. What are the opponent possibilities? He can either try to jump with the knight to b7, giving up the exchange on f1, or he can try to move the rook somewhere with the idea of giving up the knight, but for, let's say, some activity. So let's consider his options. Rook e1, even though at first it looks as a bad move, at the second glance it looks as a better one because it is aiming towards the e3 knight. But if I take here and here, opponent cannot take my knight because of the weakness of the first rank. So at the first glance it's a bad move, at the second glance it might be a good one, but at the third look at the position you know that rook e1 is not working. Due to this fact, he does not have that many alternatives. Either rook g1 or rook b1 are just so passive that I can then simply take the knight, and I have 2 pawns in exchange for an exchange and plenty of activity, so I would be happy. So rook c1 seems like the only option, but now I can simply trade the rooks, take a knight, cover this check with the bishop, and even though it seems like this rook is active, this king is under pressure and so on, I will be simply playing g6, king g7, reactivating my bishop. An opponent does not have any weakness to target really. He cannot attack anything. This knight is a monster. Dark squares are amazing for me, so I was really happy to see such position. So for those reasons, my opponent at this point decided to play knight b7, after which I obviously took a rook, and now I played rook c3. The idea is this knight has nowhere to go. That's the obvious part, but I don't really want to attack it directly because after rook c7, bishop a6, let's say, my rook is not so active. So I decided to play rook c3 because I felt like, okay, he will play bishop a6 anyway, so we have the same position here, but with my rook a little bit more active. To my surprise though, he played bishop b5, and at first I did not understand his idea, like what is he trying to achieve. But his idea is simple. He wants to play knight d8 and knight c6 because now bishop protects this square. And after finding out this idea, I felt like, okay, this move might not be the best one. And for this reason, I have to, let's say, go back a little bit, and I played queen f6, simply covering the d8 square, still not allowing the knight to jump away. And at this point, my opponent went deep into the tank, let's say, into the thought process, meaning that I mentioned that before I had a time problem. My opponent was creating a time pressure on myself, and he was thinking more and more and more on all those few moves back. And at this point, I had like 10 minutes. He had like 20 of them. He was using a lot of them to think about the position. And to my big surprise, he played bishop a6. That was a move that I was expecting 1 move ago. So basically I got a tempo for free, and he offered a draw. And I was in a very interesting spot because I had 10 minutes left on the clock, 12 moves to play until the time control. So 12 minutes for 12 moves is not a lot, it's such a sharp position. I got also offered a draw in a situation that I can take a pawn, but my opponent fought for so long that I felt like might be a trap. So I was kind of hoping that my opponent is not bluffing me, and I accepted the draw. Because, well, I am a piece down for only 2 pawns and I have no idea how to push those pawns for anything. I cannot really find any move for myself, and I believe this was the problem for the opponent too. Like, what else can he play? He has to protect here. This pawn is hanging, but maybe not because this rook wants to stay there. Knight has nowhere to go. Bishop is like, whatever, he can do nothing and yeah, stay there. So what in the world White is willing to play, and what in the world am I willing to play? I didn't know that, my opponent didn't know that, so I assume that's why he offered me a draw. And as I've said, I trusted him in terms of not being able to take on b3. I accepted the draw because my time was really running out. And after accepting the draw, we had a chat after the game, and I asked him, okay, you fought for so long in here, so why couldn't I take on b3? And he said, well, you could. And I was like, what? So basically you spent more than 10 minutes on thinking and you allowed me to take a pawn? Why? And he said, I don't know, I couldn't find anything better than bishop a6. and I was unhappy with your possibility of taking on b3, so I offered a draw. And I was like, okay, so you bluffed me then, because I felt like you were calculating for so long that it has to be a trap. But it wasn't, and the computer approves. I could indeed take the pawn on b3, continue the game. Who knows how would the game end, but the point is that it was a very sharp one, and with such low time, I decided not to take a risk without a piece. So very funny game, even though it still ended in a draw before the move number 30. I felt like it was a very, very good one, interesting one, and I'm very happy with my choice of sacrificing an exchange, because in my chess games you will not see that often, and in this game it was objectively and practically good. So very interesting game, I was happy with it, and still, since it was not that long, I had, let's say, free evening. So all in all, a win on every possible factor and so on. So yeah, very happy with that. And with that we can go to the review section. How did the game was evaluated by the computer? Yeah, so as you can tell, quite a nice game, 94, 93 accuracies with some brilliance to it, perhaps around the moment when I sacrificed an exchange and then when my opponent played rook c, knight c4, right? So there is the brilliant on my side, there is the brilliant on his side. So yeah, pretty nice game, I liked it a lot. A draw is a draw against higher rated opponent, so you cannot really complain that much. And with that, thank you all for watching this video, this episode. It's quite a long one because the game was so interesting, and I hope you will appreciate it by giving the video a like. And not only that, subscribe to not miss out on the future games. There are 3 more coming from this tournament. Hope you like it too. And yeah, thanks once again, and we'll see each other tomorrow. Bye bye.